The cruelest heartbreak isn't being left behind. It's discovering the person who promised you forever mailed you an invitation to celebrate forever with someone else. The envelope arrived on a rainy Tuesday, tucked neatly between a grocery coupon and my electric bill, as ordinary as any other piece of mail. I almost tossed it onto the kitchen counter without looking, but the elegant cream paper caught my attention. My name, Ethan Brooks, was written across the front in familiar handwriting I hadn't seen in 3 years. My chest tightened before I even opened it. Somehow, some impossible part of me already knew. Inside rested a thick invitation trimmed with gold foil. Ryan Carter and Victoria Langley request the honor of your presence at their wedding. I stared at the words until they blurred together. The apartment around me remained painfully quiet except for the steady tapping of rain against the windows. 3 years. 3 whole years had passed since Ryan walked out of our tiny apartment, carrying one suitcase, and every promise he had ever made to me. I had convinced myself that enough time could turn heartbreak into a distant memory. I had told myself I had healed. I had repeated it so often that I almost believed it. Yet one folded piece of paper had just undone years of careful rebuilding. My coffee had gone cold beside my laptop. A half-finished logo design waited on the screen for a client who expected revisions before 5 o'clock, but my hands refused to touch the keyboard. Instead, they traced the embossed letters on the invitation like they belonged to someone else's life. Victoria Langley. The last name alone was enough for anyone in New York to recognize. Her family owned luxury hotels, investment firms, and enough real estate to make headlines every few months. They were the kind of people who appeared on magazine covers smiling beside million-dollar charity checks. Ryan used to joke that one day we'd stay in one of those hotels after saving for years. Apparently, he had found a much faster way inside. I leaned back in my chair and laughed once, though nothing about the sound resembled happiness. It was amazing how memory worked. I couldn't remember what I had eaten last Friday, but I could still remember every tiny detail of the afternoon Ryan left. The sunlight spilling across our old hardwood floor. The scent of coffee drifting from the kitchen. The hopeful smile I wore because I thought we were celebrating his promotion. Instead, he told me love wasn't enough anymore. He wanted stability, opportunity, a future I couldn't give him. I remembered standing there speechless while he packed the last of his clothes into a navy suitcase we'd bought together during a Black Friday sale. Before closing the apartment door behind him, he had looked at me with eyes that already belonged somewhere else and quietly said, "I'm sorry, Ethan. One day you'll understand." I never did. My phone buzzed across the table, pulling me back to the present. My best friend Noah's name flashed across the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hey," I said, trying to sound normal. "You okay?" he asked immediately. "You sound weird." I glanced down at the invitation still resting in my lap. My thumb stopped on one small handwritten note beneath the printed details. "Hope you'll come. It would mean a lot. Ryan." For a long moment I couldn't breathe. I had survived losing him. I had survived rebuilding my life from nothing. But I wasn't prepared for the one thing I never saw coming. Ryan hadn't just invited me to his wedding. Somehow, after everything that happened, he wanted me there to watch him marry someone else. The invitation remained on my kitchen table for 3 days. Every time I walked past it, I promised myself I would throw it away. Every time I reached for it, my fingers hesitated. It was strange how paper could feel heavier than stone. On Friday evening, I finally slid it back into the envelope, tucked it inside a desk drawer, and closed it with more force than necessary. Some memories deserved to stay locked away. Others refused to listen. 3 years earlier, life had been wonderfully ordinary. Ryan and I rented a tiny one-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn where the air conditioner rattled every summer and the radiator complained every winter. We argued about whose turn it was to buy groceries, laughed whenever. The smoke detector panicked over my terrible attempts at cooking, and spent Sunday mornings walking through neighborhood street markets with 2 cups of cheap coffee warming our hands. We never had much money, but I honestly believed we had everything else. Ryan had always dreamed bigger than I did. He talked about penthouses overlooking Central Park, luxury vacations in Europe, and driving a car that did not make strange noises every time it turned left. I admired that ambition because it pushed both of us forward. When he landed an interview with Langley Capital, I hugged him so tightly he laughed and nearly spilled his coffee across my shirt. We celebrated with dollar slices of pizza because that was all we could afford, and somehow it tasted like the best meal in New York. A month later, he came home wearing a tailored navy suit I had never seen before. I smiled immediately. "You got the job." He nodded, but the excitement I expected never reached his eyes. Instead, he stood quietly by the window, staring at the city skyline glowing beyond the glass. Something felt different. Something invisible had already changed. Over the following weeks, he stayed later at the office. Business dinners replaced movie nights. Weekend meetings replaced our morning walks. When he did come home, he looked exhausted in a way sleep could not fix. I kept telling myself he was adjusting to a demanding career. Good relationships survived busy seasons. At least that was what I believed. Then one Saturday afternoon, he asked if we could talk. Those 4 words sounded harmless until I saw the suitcase standing beside the couch. My stomach dropped before he spoke. He rubbed both hands together as though searching for the right sentence. "Ethan," he began softly, "you deserve someone who wants the same future you do." I frowned, confused. "I thought we did." He looked away. "I cannot keep pretending love solves everything." The room suddenly felt smaller. "What is that supposed to mean?" I asked. He took a slow breath. "I have been offered opportunities that could change my life forever. I cannot ignore them." "Our life?" I corrected quietly. His silence answered me before his words did. "Victoria and her family believe I can help lead several new projects," he admitted. "This is bigger than anything I imagined." I searched his face, hoping he would smile and tell me it was only business. Instead, I saw guilt. Real guilt. The kind people carried when they had already made their decision days before the conversation began. "Are you leaving me?" I whispered. His eyes filled with regret, but not enough to stop him. "I think this is the right choice." My throat tightened so badly I could barely speak. "For your career?" Ryan closed his suitcase. "For my future." I stood there frozen while he reached for the doorknob. Just before stepping outside, he turned back one last time. "One day you will see why I had to do this." The apartment door clicked shut with a sound so ordinary that no one else in the building would have noticed. For me, it marked the exact moment everything I believed about forever quietly came to an end. The weeks after Ryan left did not explode into dramatic disasters the way movies like to pretend. They unraveled quietly, one ordinary day at a time. His coffee mug stayed on the top shelf because I could not bring myself to move it. His favorite hoodie remained hanging beside mine in the closet long after I knew he would never wear it again. Every morning, I woke up expecting to hear his alarm buzzing from the other side of the room. And every morning the silence reminded me that habits could outlive love. Friends invited me out, but I invented excuses until eventually they stopped asking so often. Noah refused to give up that easily. Every Friday evening he showed up with takeout, claiming he had accidentally ordered too much food again. We both knew he was lying, but I appreciated the effort more than I ever managed to say. One evening he looked around the apartment and sighed. "You cannot keep living inside a museum dedicated to your old relationship." I laughed weakly. "I am trying." He picked up the framed photograph Ryan and I had taken at Coney Island during our first summer together. "Trying starts with this." He handed me the frame. My hands trembled before I finally placed it inside a cardboard box with the rest of the memories. It felt less like cleaning and more like saying goodbye all over again. Work became my only distraction. As a freelance graphic designer, I accepted every project that landed in my inbox, convincing myself that staying busy meant moving forward. For a while it worked. Long hours blurred into longer nights until my apartment became nothing more than a place to sleep for a few restless hours. Then the economy shifted, clients reduced their budgets, and one by one the contracts disappeared. Within 2 months, nearly half my income had vanished. I smiled through video meetings while quietly calculating how many weeks of rent I could still afford. Stress settled into my body like permanent winter. I skipped meals because deadlines felt more urgent than dinner. Coffee replaced breakfast. Sleep became unpredictable. One cold November morning, I stood in line at a neighborhood grocery store when the room suddenly tilted. The bright fluorescent lights blurred into white streaks. My knees felt strangely weightless. I reached for the shopping cart, missed it completely, and the next thing I remembered was opening my eyes to worried strangers standing nearby. "Take it easy," someone said calmly. "You fainted for a second." Embarrassment rushed in before anything else. "I am fine," I insisted automatically. "You are definitely not fine," another voice answered with quiet confidence. I looked up and saw a man kneeling beside me. He appeared to be around my age, wearing jeans, a charcoal sweater, and a navy jacket with a hospital identification badge still clipped to one pocket. His expression was steady, professional, but unexpectedly kind. "My name is Lucas Hayes," he said with a reassuring smile. "I am a physician. You probably pushed yourself a little too hard." I tried sitting up too quickly, and the room spun again. Lucas gently steadied my shoulder without making me feel helpless. "Easy," he said. "There is no prize for pretending you feel better before you actually do." Despite everything, I let out a small laugh. It was the first genuine laugh I had heard from myself in months. Lucas smiled as though that tiny sound mattered more than any medical chart. At that moment, I believed he was simply a stranger who happened to be in the right place at the right time. I had no idea that one unexpected meeting in the checkout aisle of a grocery store was quietly becoming the first page of an entirely different chapter of my life. Lucas insisted on walking me to the small clinic 2 blocks away, even after I told him at least 5 times that I was perfectly capable of getting there myself. "Humor me," he said with an easy smile. "Doctors become very annoying when they think someone is ignoring common sense." I rolled my eyes, but I followed him anyway. The examination turned out exactly the way I expected. Too much stress, too little sleep, too much coffee, not enough actual food. Lucas folded his arms after reviewing the basic tests and gave me the kind of disappointed look that somehow felt more encouraging than judgmental. "Your body has been trying to get your attention for weeks," he said. "Today it finally succeeded." I thanked him, promised I would take better care of myself, and assumed that would be the end of our brief encounter. Instead, the following Saturday morning, my phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. "Good morning. This is Lucas from the grocery store. Have you eaten breakfast yet? Or should I prepare another lecture?" I stared at the message longer than necessary before smiling to myself. It was a small smile, barely noticeable, but it had been a long time since one appeared without effort. I replied that I had eaten. It was only half true. A granola bar hardly counted as breakfast, but it was progress. Lucas answered with a thumbs-up emoji followed by the address of a weekend farmer's market in one simple sentence. "Fresh air helps more than people realize. If you feel like walking, I will be there around 10. I almost declined. For months, I had become an expert at saying no. No to invitations. No to conversations. No to anything that required leaving my apartment unless absolutely necessary. Yet something about his message felt refreshingly free of expectations. He was not trying to impress me. He was not asking for anything. He was simply offering company. At 10:15, I found him standing beside a flower stand comparing 2 bunches of sunflowers with the seriousness of someone making an important medical decision. When he noticed me, his face brightened. "Good," he said. "Now I have someone to settle a debate. Which looks happier?" I laughed. "Flowers look happy?" "The good ones do," he replied without hesitation. That became our routine. Some weekends we wandered through bookstores where Lucas somehow managed to leave with medical biographies while I collected design magazines. Other weekends we explored neighborhoods neither of us had visited before, raiding coffee shops with completely unscientific enthusiasm. He never asked detailed questions about my past. He never pushed me to explain why certain songs made me suddenly quiet or why I occasionally stopped smiling after seeing couples holding hands on the subway. Instead, he seemed to understand that healing happened best when it was not rushed. Winter slowly melted into spring. My freelance business began attracting new clients through referrals, and with each completed project my confidence quietly returned. One afternoon, I caught my reflection in a storefront window and paused. The tired man with hollow eyes who had spent months surviving instead of living had slowly disappeared. He was still me, but lighter somehow, as though someone had finally opened a window in a room that had been closed for years. Lucas noticed the change too. As we sat on a park bench sharing sandwiches one warm afternoon, he looked at me thoughtfully before saying, "You smile with your eyes now." I blinked, surprised. Did I not before? He shook his head gently. "Before, your smile looked like it was apologizing for taking up space." His words settled quietly in my heart. For the first time since Ryan left, I realized I had gone an entire day without thinking about the man who broke it. I did not know that somewhere else in the city, while my life was finally moving forward, Ryan's carefully chosen future was beginning to fall apart. Life has a strange sense of timing. Just when I finally stopped measuring my days by what I had lost, The universe quietly began balancing accounts I never asked it to settle. It started with Noah bursting into my apartment one Friday evening, carrying Thai takeout, and enough excitement for both of us. "You are never going to believe this," he announced before even taking off his jacket. I looked up from my laptop, amused. "Did you win the lottery?" "Better." He dropped onto the couch and held up his phone. "Remember Ryan?" My stomach barely reacted to hearing the name. That alone surprised me. "What about him?" Noah hesitated for a moment, almost as if deciding whether he should continue. Langley Capital is all over the business news. Curiosity outweighed caution. I accepted the phone and skimmed the article. The headline reported a major restructuring inside the company following several failed investment projects. Executive leadership was changing. Internal disagreements had become public. Financial analysts questioned the company's direction. There was no mention of Ryan in the article itself, but a photograph accompanying the story showed him standing beside Victoria at a corporate charity event. They looked polished, successful, and strangely distant from each other. Their smiles seemed carefully rehearsed, like actors who had forgotten the ending of the play. I handed the phone back. "I hope everything works out for them," I said honestly. Noah stared at me. "That is all you have to say?" I shrugged. Holding on to anger is exhausting. He studied me for another second before grinning. "You really have changed." Maybe I had. The old version of me would have searched every article, every interview, every photograph for proof that Ryan regretted leaving. Now I simply closed my laptop and asked Noah if he wanted extra spring rolls. Across town, however, Ryan's life looked very different behind closed doors. I learned the details weeks later through mutual friends who still crossed paths with him in professional circles. Victoria spent more time traveling than she did at home. Their schedules rarely overlapped. Business dinners replaced family dinners. Public appearances became obligations instead of celebrations. The expensive apartment overlooking the Manhattan skyline felt less like a home and more like a carefully staged photograph. Then came another surprise. One afternoon, I received a message from an old coworker who had recently attended a fundraising gala. Attached was a candid picture taken somewhere near the ballroom entrance. In the background stood Ryan completely alone while guests laughed and mingled around him. He was wearing another perfectly tailored suit, but something about him looked smaller than I remembered. The confidence that once filled every room had quietly faded. His shoulders slumped. His smile never reached his eyes. I almost closed the picture without another thought when my phone vibrated again. This time it was Lucas. "I am off work early. There is a food festival in Brooklyn with embarrassingly large slices of cheesecake. Interested?" I smiled before typing my answer. "Absolutely." By sunset, I was laughing as Lucas unsuccessfully attempted to carry 2 oversized desserts and 2 cups of coffee at the same time. One cup tipped slightly, splashing coffee onto his sleeve. He looked at the stain with dramatic disappointment before saying, "I think this officially counts as a medical emergency." I laughed so hard that strangers nearby smiled at us. At that exact moment, while I stood beneath strings of warm lights surrounded by music, conversation, and the sweet scent of fresh pastries, I realized happiness had returned so quietly that I had almost missed its arrival. I did not know someone else was watching a very different evening unfold. Because somewhere across the city, Ryan had finally begun to understand that the life he chased so desperately had cost him the one person who had loved him long before success ever did. The wedding invitation stayed hidden inside my desk drawer, untouched but never forgotten. I still had not decided whether I would go. Some mornings I convinced myself ignoring it was the healthiest choice. Other mornings curiosity whispered that closure sometimes required facing the past instead of avoiding it. Lucas never pressured me either way. One evening as we walked along the Hudson River watching ferries drift across the water, he noticed I had become unusually quiet. "You have that look again," he said gently. "What look?" I asked. "The one where your mind is somewhere your feet are not." I smiled at the observation and finally admitted everything. The invitation, the memories, the uncertainty. Lucas listened without interrupting, his hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket as the cool breeze carried the scent of the river between us. When I finished, he simply nodded. "Whatever you decide," he said, "make sure you are doing it for yourself, not for the version of you who was hurting 3 years ago." His words stayed with me long after we said goodnight. A week later, another envelope arrived, this one much thinner than the first. I opened it while standing beside my mailbox. Inside was a simple printed notice informing guests that the wedding had been postponed indefinitely due to unforeseen personal circumstances. I read the sentence twice before slipping the paper back into the envelope. There was no satisfaction, no celebration, only quiet surprise. By the following afternoon, the rumors had already spread through mutual acquaintances. Victoria had ended the engagement after months of growing distance between them. Some blamed conflicting priorities. Others blamed constant pressure from both families. Nobody seemed to know the full story, and for the first time I realized I no longer felt the need to find out. Life moved on. Mine certainly had. 2 weekends later, Lucas convinced me to visit a spring art festival in Manhattan where several local designers were displaying their work. The park buzzed with music, food trucks, children chasing bubbles across the grass, and artists proudly explaining their creations to curious visitors. I had just finished speaking with another designer about a collaborative project when Lucas disappeared to buy lemonade. I wandered toward a photography exhibit, smiling as sunlight filtered through rows of framed city landscapes. Then I heard someone quietly say my name. Ethan. My heartbeat stumbled before I even turned around. Ryan stood only a few feet away. For a moment, neither of us moved. He looked older than I remembered, not because of wrinkles or gray hair, but because exhaustion had settled gently across his face. The sharp confidence that once defined him had softened into something quieter. His expensive suit had been replaced by a simple button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms. He offered an uncertain smile that disappeared almost immediately. "Hi," he said. I returned a polite nod. "Hi, Ryan." An awkward silence stretched between us, filled only by distant laughter and live music drifting across the park. Before either of us found another word, Lucas returned carrying 2 oversized cups of lemonade. "They were almost out of ice," he said cheerfully before noticing the stranger standing beside me. His eyes shifted briefly toward mine, silently asking if everything was all right. I smiled reassuringly. "Lucas, this is Ryan." Lucas extended his hand without hesitation. "Nice to meet you." Ryan accepted the handshake, but something changed in his expression as he glanced from Lucas to me. It lasted only a second, yet it was impossible to miss. For the first time since we had met again, Ryan looked not surprised that I had moved on, but genuinely afraid that he had arrived far too late. Lucas glanced between Ryan and me, sensing there was history neither of us was ready to explain. With his usual effortless kindness, he smiled and lifted the extra lemonade slightly. "I am going to check out the sculpture exhibit over there," he said. "Take your time." He gave my shoulder a light, reassuring pat before walking a short distance away, close enough that I could still see him, but far enough to give us privacy. Ryan watched him leave before turning back to me. "He seems like a good man," he said quietly. "He is," I replied without hesitation. Another silence settled between us. It felt different from the awkward pauses we used to have during difficult conversations. Back then, silence carried fear. Now it carried acceptance. Ryan looked down at the grass before finally speaking. "I almost did not recognize you." I smiled faintly. "People change." He nodded. "You look happier." It was not a question. "I am." The answer seemed to hit him harder than I expected. He inhaled slowly, searching for words that refused to come easily. "I have wanted to talk to you for months." "Then why did you send a wedding invitation instead?" I asked. His expression tightened with embarrassment. At the time, I thought everything was going according to plan. I thought I had built the life I wanted. He laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "Turns out I spent years chasing something that looked successful from the outside and completely empty on the inside." I listened without interrupting. 3 years ago, I would have begged to hear those words. Now they simply sounded sad. Ryan rubbed the back of his neck, a nervous habit I remembered from long ago. "Victoria and I were never right for each other. We respected each other, but we never really knew each other. Everything became about appearances, meetings, expectations, and proving ourselves. Somewhere along the way, I realized I had traded peace for prestige." His eyes finally met mine. "And I traded you for both." The honesty in his voice surprised me. There were no excuses, no attempts to shift responsibility, just regret laid bare between us. "I was angry for a long time," I admitted. "I know." Then I was hurt. He lowered his head. "I know that too." Eventually, I stopped asking why you left. I started asking how I was going to move forward instead. Ryan nodded slowly. almost as though every sentence confirmed something he had feared. I never stopped thinking about you, Ethan. I looked at him calmly. Thinking about someone and choosing them are not the same thing. My words lingered in the air. He closed his eyes briefly before whispering, "You are right." We stood quietly while children laughed nearby, and a musician played an acoustic guitar somewhere across the park. Life continued around us, without caring that two people were trying to untangle the past. Finally, Ryan spoke again. "I know I do not deserve another chance. I know I hurt you more than I can ever repair. But if there is even the smallest possibility that we could start over, I would spend the rest of my life proving I learned from my mistakes." I looked toward Lucas, who happened to glance back at that exact moment. He did not wave. He did not interrupt. He simply smiled when our eyes met, a calm, patient smile that carried no pressure and no fear. When I turned back to Ryan, I realized something extraordinary had happened without me noticing. The man standing in front of me was once the center of my entire world. Now he was only someone I sincerely hoped would eventually forgive himself, because I already had. Ryan looked at me as though he were waiting for a verdict that would decide the rest of his life. I understood that feeling because years earlier I had stood in our apartment hoping one different sentence might keep him from walking away. Back then, love had felt fragile, something that could disappear between one heartbeat and the next. Standing in the park now, I realized love had never been the fragile part. Trust was. Once broken, it did not return simply because someone finally understood its value. I took a slow breath before speaking. "I appreciate your honesty." Ryan gave a small hopeful nod. "But honesty after the fact cannot change the choices that were made." He swallowed hard. "I know. You once told me I deserved someone who wanted the same future I did." I smiled gently. "You were right. I just did not realize it at the time." His eyes shimmered with quiet disappointment. "You found that future with him, did you not?" I glanced toward Lucas, who was now laughing with a local artist demonstrating watercolor techniques to a group of children. He was completely unaware that the conversation happening a few yards away was quietly changing 3 different lives. "I found peace first," I answered. "Meeting Lucas happened after that." Ryan lowered his gaze. "I wish I had understood what really mattered before it was too late." "So do I admitted. "Because if you had, neither of us would have spent years carrying pain that never needed to exist." He let out a slow breath that sounded almost like relief. "I kept telling myself I would fix everything one day. I thought success would make the sacrifice worth it. Then I achieved everything I thought I wanted and realized I had nobody to celebrate with who truly knew me." I nodded. "Sometimes the wrong dream still comes true." The sentence lingered between us. Ryan smiled sadly. "You always knew how to say the thing I needed to hear." I laughed softly. "Not always. We both ignored plenty of truths." He could not argue with that. The breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers through the park as people continued strolling past us, completely unaware of the quiet ending unfolding nearby. Ryan reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was the original wedding invitation, slightly creased around the edges. "I kept one for myself," he said. "Every time I looked at it after everything fell apart, I realized the only person I truly wanted to invite into my future was the one I had already left behind." He looked at the card for a long moment before folding it again and slipping it back into his pocket. "I guess this is my reminder that some opportunities only come once." I stepped a little closer and rested a hand briefly on his shoulder. "Do not let this become the story you tell yourself forever." He looked confused. I continued, "Learn from it. Become better because of it. But do not spend the rest of your life believing one mistake defines who you are." His eyes filled with gratitude. "You are forgiving me?" "I forgave you a long time ago," I said honestly. "I just never told you because I no longer needed you to hear it." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Lucas wandered back toward us holding 3 paper cups of fresh lemonade. Without asking questions, he smiled warmly and offered one to Ryan as naturally as if they had been friends for years. Ryan accepted it with quiet appreciation before looking at both of us together. In that simple moment, I think he finally understood something no amount of money or success had ever managed to teach him. The greatest wealth in life was never measured by what you gained. It was measured by the people who chose to stay when they had every reason to walk away. Lucas and I left the festival just as the evening sky turned shades of gold and soft blue above the Manhattan skyline. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. We simply walked side by side, listening to the distant sounds of street musicians and ferries gliding across the river. Finally, Lucas smiled and handed me the last sip of his lemonade. "You look lighter," he said. I laughed quietly. "I think I finally am." He tilted his head. "Do you want to tell me what happened?" I nodded. I said goodbye. Lucas looked at me for a moment before answering. "That sounds more important than saying hello." We continued walking until we reached a quiet overlook where the city lights shimmered across the water. The breeze carried the scent of spring flowers from a nearby garden, and for the first time in years I realized the future no longer frightened me. It felt open instead of uncertain, peaceful instead of empty. Weeks passed. My business continued growing, bringing projects I once believed were far beyond my reach. Lucas and I settled into a life built from ordinary moments that somehow became extraordinary because we shared them together. Saturday breakfasts at our favorite neighborhood cafe, evening walks after his hospital shifts, movie nights where we spent more time talking than actually watching the film. Nothing about our life looked dramatic from the outside, yet everything about it felt real. One Sunday afternoon, Lucas invited me to the botanical garden. We wandered through rows of blooming roses until we reached a quiet greenhouse filled with orchids. Sunlight streamed through the glass ceiling, covering the room in warm golden light. Lucas stopped walking and turned toward me with an expression I had never seen before. Calm, hopeful, and just a little nervous. "You once told me that healing felt impossible," he said softly. "Then you proved yourself wrong." He reached into his jacket pocket and held out a small velvet box. My heart skipped a beat. "I am not asking because I think either of us needs someone to complete us," he continued. "I am asking because I love the person you became all on your own, and I would be honored if we could keep building this life together." He opened the box, revealing a simple silver ring that caught the afternoon light. My eyes filled with tears before I could answer. "Yes," I whispered. "Yes, I would love that." Lucas laughed with visible relief as he slipped the ring onto my finger. Nearby visitors quietly applauded, and someone joked that the flowers had picked the perfect day to bloom. We laughed with them, surrounded by warmth instead of fear, hope instead of uncertainty. A month later, Noah insisted on throwing us an engagement party. Friends filled the room with laughter, homemade desserts, and far too many embarrassing stories about my college years. Near the end of the evening, I noticed a small envelope resting on the gift table without a return address. Inside was a handwritten card. "Congratulations, Ethan. Thank you for teaching me that success means nothing without someone to share it with. I truly hope your future is everything mine should have been. Be happy. You deserve it. Ryan." I folded the note carefully and smiled. There were no tears this time, only gratitude for everything life had taught all of us, even through heartbreak. I slipped the card into a keepsake box beside old photographs, not as a reminder of what I had lost, but as proof of how far I had come. Sometimes people enter our lives to stay forever. Sometimes they leave behind lessons that quietly shape the person we eventually become. I once believed the greatest tragedy was losing the man I loved. I understand now that the greatest victory was refusing to lose myself along the way. Because the moment I finally chose my own happiness, life introduced me to someone who chose me every single day.